pleasure to be here. The last time I was in South Africa, it was 3 years ago, and it was a working group working on the revision of 17025. So I want to thank Frank and Amanda and the SABS for the opportunity to come back, because I like to come back as much as I can in that respect. I think Amanda gave a really refreshing and frank opening, and I think it is a huge opportunity for everyone, and I hope in some way to be able to contribute to that opportunity. What Frank didn't tell you is I actually also worked for the SABS many years ago, before going to SANAS, and I did actually do my ISO 9001 training at the SABS, so he wasn't lying. They gave me a huge task to do today, so I have to cover a whole load of subjects, and it was very difficult for me to kind of gauge the depth, especially because the audience is so varied in terms of their knowledge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the presentations, and some slides I'll go through really fast, or I might skip them, especially when we get to talk about the two standards, about 17021 and 17065. For those two standards, what I want to emphasize to you guys, as auditors or as people who are responsible for implementing them, what are the critical aspects? You know, what is the flexibility in the way that you can interpret those standards and apply them? But before that, I want to tell you about CASCO, and that's the Committee on Conformity Assessment. And do I have a thing or a thing to flick the slides? No, so okay. So I think if you go to the next slide, I'm going to give you a snapshot of ISO, and it's really just 2 or 3 slides, and I just want to tell you a little bit about ISO. So we've got 162 members, of which the SABS is a member. So each country has one representative, and it's the standards body within that country. Some countries have more than one standards body, and so it's the main standards producing organisation within that country. And that's very important because we operate through our membership. We rely on them for a lot of the work that we do and for a lot of the expertise that we need. We have a portfolio of 22,000 standards. So we are the only standards organisation that writes standards literally on every topic, whether it's technical, management systems, etc. So there's a large number of standards that need to be maintained and they need to be updated with regards to it. We have 240 technical committees. So a technical committee is a committee that takes responsibility for a particular sector and develops the standards on that. So the SABS might act as chair or secretary for a particular technical committee, which is of importance to South Africa. And then they are responsible for managing the standards and ensuring the standards are developed within that technical committee. We develop over 100 standards each and every month. Now that is a combination of reviewing and revising existing standards and developing new standards. The standards that we're developing at the moment mainly are associated with the 4th Industrial Revolution. So it's looking at AI-related, artificial intelligence-related issues. It's looking at cyber security and cyber risk. It's looking at privacy, so protecting your data and being able to demonstrate or certify that organizations have got systems in place to protect data. Can we have the next slide, please? And this just gives you an indication of how the system works. So ISO in Geneva is really, you could look at it as a project management organization. We are there to ensure that if the SABS takes on a technical committee and they have to develop standards, we at the Central Secretariat liaise with the SABS to make sure that all the milestones are met and met on time. And guidance with that. When we develop a standard, we rely on international experts, and each member body is allowed to nominate people to participate in those technical committees. And one of the messages I need to get across today to all of you, the only way you can remain relevant and up to date and know what's going on is if you participate in those international committees. That is where there is an exchange of information and you're getting it firsthand. So that to me is a strategic issue that from the SABS perspective, you really have to look at. You have to identify the technical committees that are important to you and your country, priority areas, and you need to participate in those and bring back the knowledge and then transfer it with regards to it. This is just a quick slide to show you that everywhere standards are used. You know, whether you're wheeling your pram, or whether you're looking at water in a lake, or whether you're driving your car. Can we get the next slide? So if we look at conformity assessment, ISO puts a huge amount of importance on conformity assessment and the standards associated with conformity assessment. As auditors, they're all the standards that you interact with on a daily basis. The amount of importance we put on it is we don't let any other member develop them. They are managed by ISO itself. So we do not go out to a member body and say, can you organise the committee that develops conformity assessment standards? At the international level, it's recognised that they have to be strictly controlled and harmonised. So they are managed and run by my department within ISO. So we're responsible for developing those standards. Why? Why are they so important? The reason they're so important is that the WTO, which is the World Trade Organization, has indicated that the non-acceptance of test reports, so people not recognizing your test reports that you issue here, or non-recognition of your management system certificates or your product certificates, is one of the biggest obstacles to international trade and local trade. So people are very willing not to recognize if they think they can get away with it, especially if the product is coming from a developing country. This is why conformity assessment standards are like an equalizer. So it tells the international community that if you're operating to the same standards, the value of the certificates that you issue are equal to the value of certificates issued anywhere else operating to the same standards. So we have this harmonized approach, and within ISO we're very strict in applying that, and it's Casco who actually does that. If we can just have the next slide. Consensus is extremely important, and I must say that the SABS and South Africa have participated very well in the development of the Casco standards, so the 17,000 series standards related to certification and laboratories. The double level of consensus is critical. So at the national level, for the committees and for conformity assessment, and I'm going to concentrate on conformity assessment, you should be operating a Casco Mirror Committee. And that is where at the national level you get all the stakeholders, auditors should be represented, industry, government, etc. And they actually mirror what's going on at the international level in ISO for the development of the standards. And that gives you the opportunity to access the documents as they're developed and to comment on them. And I can tell you today that the participation from developing countries in the actual development of the conformity assessment standards has increased since Frank has taken over, because he has had a strategy of involving and implementing strategies that would involve developing countries in the standards development process. At the international level, then you can develop, and we have international experts, and they're nominated 2 per country, and they participate. In conformity assessment, certification is a hugely competitive business internationally. Certification bodies have to compete to get business. It's not just in South Africa, it's everywhere. So they have to really strictly control their costs, they have to add value, but above all, they've got to give confidence to the consumer or their client. If you cannot give confidence in that certified product, that it actually meets the requirements, you've lost the battle. So once you lose that confidence, it takes a lot of time to build it up. So you're actually selling confidence when you go out and do certification. So CASCO is the committee I run, and we develop policy and standards. And within the world, there are many standards developing organizations that develop different standards. There's only one organization that develops conformity assessment standards, and that is ISO. And we have to do everything that we can to maintain that position, because if you have got competing conformity assessment standards, you will not have recognition of certificates. CASCO, not everybody that's a member of ISO is a member of CASCO, and there's various reasons for that. A lot of developing countries cannot afford to participate or do not have the technical knowledge to be able to participate. Under Frank, we've looked at how we can overcome that. So we allow people to listen into the discussions of the working groups so that you can get an understanding of what the requirement really means and how to implement it from developing countries. So they can sit, they can log in, they can listen to the discussions, and it's a transfer of knowledge that actually helps them. Next slide. As you know, Frank is the chair. His chairmanship runs out at the end of this year. So he will have had 4 years in terms of it. And really his main focus was to increase the participation of developing countries. And part of that is the next CASCO plenary meeting, which is a big meeting, is in Kenya. The consumer organisation, our participation, which I'm also, is in Zimbabwe. And of course the ISO GA is being hosted by the SABS in Cape Town. So it really is kind of like the awakening of Africa. I'm going to quickly just go through the different standards. If we can, we have a total of 30 standards, and if we can go to the next slide. The standards we write are to ensure that you guys, as a certification body, or as a laboratory, you're competent. And competence is not qualification. So don't think, because you have a degree or you have a doctorate, that you're competent. You're not. Competence, that is a prerequisite. So that is something you need to have maybe before you can demonstrate your competence. And competence is a crucial factor here, because if you're not competent for what you're certifying or what you're testing, you're going to have problems going forward. So competence is the ability to apply your knowledge and skills. So when the SABS is actually looking, because they have to actually document your competence, they have to look at your ability to apply that knowledge and skill with regards to it. So we want to write standards that look at the competence and the impartiality. So the impartiality is that when you decide the product meets the specification, that decision is based on fact. It's impartial, it's objective with regards to it. And then consistent operation, and Amanda was talking about being consistent. If you're doing different things in different departments, you can't compare. So it becomes impossible to compare. This consistent operation of the certification body is crucial. Next. And we write them also for accreditation bodies. So accreditation bodies have to operate more or less to the same requirements as you guys, and they get checked for that as well. We have a common structure for all our documents, and that common structure is just to facilitate implementation. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, the next one. And then we have mandatory requirements in all of our standards. So in 17021, 17065, 17020, the wording is going to be the same. And the reason for that is to facilitate organizations that do different types of certification to implement it. And these are the clauses that will have mandatory wording in them. And I'll look at them a little bit later as well. If we can go to the next slide. So this is the group of standards that we've actually developed. It's about 30, and it looks at every type of conformity assessment body, including accreditation body. Personnel certification. And personnel certification is one of the big areas that is growing internationally. Lots of people are getting certified for different things, and in different countries, doctors are using 17024 to certify additional competence criteria in terms of what they do. In conformity assessment, you've got three approaches. You can self-declare you meet a standard, and that's supplier's declaration. So in some regions of the world, they allow that. So in Europe, the European Union, if it's a very low-risk situation, they allow the manufacturer to say, I meet ISO 9001, or I meet this. They do it in accordance with 17050, so that they have all the documents that they can produce to the regulator to show that they meet it. And the reason they allow self-declaration is if there's a low risk and there is good market surveillance, it's a system that can work and be cost effective. In addition to that, sorry, can we just stay with that one again? In addition to that, we've got inspection, and I know that you do inspection. And inspection is slightly different because inspection relies on the professional judgment of the inspector. And the decision process for an inspection body is different. So in certification of management systems and in certification of products, the decision is taken by someone else. In inspection, the inspector takes the decision there and then, which means the competence of the inspector is crucial. He has got no one reviewing or overseeing it. Next slide. This just gives you an indication. So if you look at this, and the only reason I'm putting this on is we have 11 parts to 17021, of which 10 of them are different competence criteria depending on the management system. What does that mean to you as an auditor? That means for you as an auditor that if you're a QMS auditor, you're an EMS auditor, you are a facilities management auditor or anti-bribery, your competence criteria has to be measured against the relevant parts. And to make that even more difficult for you, each of these parts, once they're published, they're mandated by IAF, which means that SABS has to come and make sure you do that you're meeting those technical competence criteria. It identifies the knowledge and skill that you need. So today, there's more and more pressure being placed on an auditor to be able to demonstrate their competence. And so it's a big part of the process. And remember, it's crucial to obtain confidence in the process. You have to have competent people. Next slide, sorry. Ongoing working groups. What's interesting here is we are writing a conformity assessment standard which the SABS can take up next year for verification and validation. And that is a new business opportunity in terms of what you can do. Okay, next slide, I'm just going to do that. So, sometimes RVA will come here, SADS will come here, and Amanda might disagree with them on a finding. So you go to the requirement and you might have a different interpretation of the requirement. And that happens sometimes. And when that happens and that can't be resolved, it can come back to CASCO, and the SABS, not SABS certification, but the SABS standards body can say, we would like you to give an interpretation of a particular clause. And this happens all the time, and I'll show you this. There's about 15 or 20 of those interpretations which are on the website with regards to it. So it's a process to facilitate that. Next slide. If you go onto the ISO website, I don't know if you can make that bigger, but there's a huge amount of information there, and what you need to be aware of are the interpretations. If you go, yeah, there, the interpretations. So the interpretations, this is the clarification process, so it's a clarification. If you go in there, you will see what we have done, and you will be able to either apply them or not with regards to it. So I'm now going to go on to, and that was just a brief introduction to give you an idea of the infrastructure around the development of conformity assessment standards. You can press next slide. So I'm going to look quickly about trends because this is quite interesting. So what are the current trends? We do a survey, and what we do is we measure all the 9001 certificates that are out there in the world, accredited certificates, only accredited. But it's not just ISO 9001, it's a whole load of management systems, and I'll show you. And this year for the first time, or sorry, last year for the first time, there was in 2017, there was a big drop. It was about 50,000. So people were very quick to jump on the bandwagon and say, ISO 9000 certification is dead, it's reached its peak, it's not going anywhere. And to a certain degree, it's correct. But when we go in and we analyse the figures, I can tell you it is still growing significantly. What we have found is that certification bodies at the international level don't count their certificates consistently. So when we get information from a certification body, 1 year on accredited certificates, they might report they've got 50,000, and the next year they report they've got 30,000. There's no way a certification body can lose 20,000 certificates. It's a problem for certification bodies. You are not counting and controlling your certificates. We get huge variation. What is the problem with that? First of all, the figures, the uncertainty becomes great and the data becomes less useful. Second, you have at the UN an organization called the Global Innovation Index. Part of the input to calculating that for a country. So what they do is they rank countries in terms of their ability to innovate. The number of ISO 9001 certificates and 14001 certificates can shift a country up or down on that scale. So the UN recognise those standards and that certification as being a contribution to innovation, but now your part must be that you manage the certificate process properly so that we get good data. Next slide. So this is really just from 2017. We're always 2 years behind because we wait to collect the data in a full year. And you can see the big drop. But there are some standards that are growing and growing and growing and growing. Energy efficiency is one of them. It's regulated in some countries, so it's a huge opportunity. So a lot of governments want buildings, especially government buildings, certified for their energy efficiency. And that's something that's coming out more and more with regards to it. I just put that there. You can get all these figures on the ISO website. If we can go to the next slide. So what do people really think of certification? The big companies out there. What do they think of quality and certification? And this is really, they do still think it contributes hugely to their performance. And it is a strategic imperative, and it allows you to be able to compete much more effectively. And it is a competitive edge. It can be a competitive edge with respect to it. It's identified, so they see a positive relationship between quality and profitability. So that is crucial because that gives you a basis to sell your services. So not only are you building confidence, but they're actually seeing a financial benefit to paying the fees. And as I talked about, it does promote innovation. The next slide, please. I'm not going to go through all of these because these you're very, very familiar with. You know, the impacts from certification, what does it do to an organization? What I would like to do is talk about what's on the next slide, and that's future developments. So let's look at the market evolution. What's going to happen in the future? And remember, certification is very competitive, and it's becoming very specialized. So what we see happening is a proliferation, initially, of conformity assessment activities. So there is going to be lots of people getting in on certification. They're going to be trying and taking over different markets. They're going to try and compete in different markets. So there's going to be this aspect, and it's going to grow and grow initially. There will be a bit of a stagnation in terms of the old quality ISO 9000 certification, and I'll talk about that a little bit later in terms of moving to more of an excellence situation. Niche-based certification schemes. So we see, you know, you have huge global certification bodies, So you've got people like BVQI, you've got SGS. SGS has, I think it was $2 billion profit last year. They are 51% owned by a private family. They are gigantic and they compete very, very well. BVQI also competes very well and they've got systems in place. So you have to be able to compete with these types of organisations. And where you can is in the specialties. And we'll talk a little bit later about the local certification. Value chains and supply chains are becoming more and more complex. So you've got to be able to offer your customer a whole process. They don't want to be going to different people or different certification organisations or different test houses. They want it simplified for them and they want to have confidence that you can actually do it and give them the results. Life cycles are being reduced, so people no longer go and get things fixed. They're jumped with regards to it. So once your washing machine goes, you have to get it fixed, you buy a new one, etc. So that has to be taken into the process of product certification. And how do you handle that life cycle? And how does it impact on the environment? And as you can see, in some countries today, there is this tendency towards raising technical barriers and other barriers to trade. So this could be, and it's a way of limiting competition and stopping people from competing. So those are the kind of issues that as a certification body you're going to have to deal with. Aggressive competition from certification bodies. That is already there. In Europe there is huge competition for European contracts and things like that. They compete on time. They're willing to take a loss to get a job initially. So there is this huge competitive nature that you've got to overcome. And I noticed when you said if you do lose a client, you've lost them a minimum for the cycle. That is a minimum. And then when you want to bring them back on, you've got to be able to offer them something more than what they've got. So it's better not to lose them in the first place. It's better to keep them. An increase in risk. So that can offer you opportunities. There are tremendous good standards out there that are coming out in terms of that, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So here is where it's going to impact you as auditors. There's going to be an increase in industry sector schemes. So it's not just the automotive, it's not just telecommunications, it's not just aerospace. Industries are getting together and developing more and more industry schemes. It can be around veterinary medicine, it can be around feed, it can be around that. The reason industry are doing that is it gives them better control. They can also set requirements for you guys, and the kind of requirements that they usually set are around auditor competence with respect to it. But also the way the certification body and the AB, the accreditation body, is not left out of that process because they also want to be sure that the accreditation body operates competently, consistently and impartially. A rise in local schemes, and that's where you have a business opportunity in terms of it, and local labels. So that's where the innovation comes in. You know, people getting together and looking at different schemes that they can actually develop. Technology, a focus, and this is where ISO 9000 comes in, a focus on management, advanced management practice and quality excellence. So you have to be looking to the future and seeing how do you develop and adapt your certification scheme to be able to offer this in addition to anything else so that they don't go anywhere else. This is the value added with respect to it. Sustainability is a huge thing in Europe now. You know, being able to demonstrate that you're sustainable. Ethics and anti-bribery. Bribery is everywhere in the world, and we've seen it in Europe over the last few years with certification bodies. We've had huge scandals with multinational certification bodies. We had the Volkswagen scandal. We had in France, where the CB owner went to jail, was on breast implants. They were certified in a regulated area in France, and for 30 years they operated using industrial gel instead of medical gel. And they were only, it was 20 years they had operated. So the whole top management are now sitting in prison, and it was the biggest supplier, and the company is closed. They were certified. It was a mixture of this combination. So you've got to be careful with respect to it. And of course, the impact of artificial intelligence. So I can tell you there are some schemes out there that are sustainable schemes. So what they're looking at is farms in Africa that are producing cocoa. And the way they monitor those farms from a certification perspective is either through drones or through satellites. They want to make sure that the farms that are 1,000 miles away, that the farmer is still providing the social or meeting the social requirements in terms of schools. So this use of technology opens up a whole field. But in addition to that, it allows for constant monitoring or more frequent monitoring. So these are the things that are being used at the moment by a number of schemes. Impacts for CBs, it's your competence, and we talked about that. So you're going to have a busy time and tuning yourselves up to be able to do it. But you've also got to be multi-skilled. So you've got to be able to deal with not just one scheme, because your value is in being able to work with a number of different schemes in it. So you've got to really tool yourself up and make yourself valuable to your organisation in terms of those competence criteria. Accreditation bodies add requirements to try and get this consistent operation. And it's something that we disagree with. So we have this ongoing battle with the International Accreditation Forum, because from an ISO perspective, we consider ISO as the only organisation that can set requirements. IF and ILIC can set requirements for the implementation of their mutual recognition agreement and to make sure that that is consistent. So sometimes we have that discussion with them. I've talked about the multi-scheme auditor pool. You have to become more flexible in the way marketing is going to become very important. You've got to get those people. You've got to be able to demonstrate that you're the best choice in these circumstances. And of course, we're seeing the mergers happening in Europe already. So there is a tendency, and the certification community internationally think that the bigger organizations will get bigger. The mid-sized organizations are on a road, unless they specialize, are on a road to maybe not getting bigger. And then there will be many small specialized CBs. These are CBs that operate in one or two schemes. And they're small and they're effective, so they've got and they're local. They've got the knowledge. So if you've got a local scheme here, you might have 4 or 5 people getting together, getting accredited, and operating just within that. So that's that will be the future competition in it. And I've talked about the other one. Next one, sorry. So what would the modern client focus on? What would they want from you? They want a one-stop shop where they have confidence and you add value. So you have to be able to offer them that package, but also meet the requirements in terms of it. You've got to be able to indicate that their suppliers, if they are getting their suppliers that are certified by you, they don't have to worry about it. They can just accept because they have full faith in you. If we go to the next one, if we look at governments, this is quite interesting because I think in South Africa, I think the government, and I speak under correction here, I think the government can mandate ISO 9001 certification. In a lot of countries, they can't do that. But governments need to become more aware of the value of it, and that's a role that you need to do, is to work with regulators to promote it. And to promote the fact that third-party certification is something that gives them confidence and they don't have to redo things. And governments in Europe are beginning now to give more incentives for quality and to promote their products. So there's lots of opportunities for government to help the process. Next slide. Final remarks, and this is on accreditation. I've worked in certification and I've worked in accreditation, and I've been involved in IF and ILIC for quite a while. The same applies to accreditation bodies. They have to be credible. Their benefit is in how people perceive that value. If people don't think the accreditation adds value, or that the accreditors don't add value, they also have lost their contribution. So ABs have to be able to walk that line where they do make sure that you're meeting the requirements, but they're also doing it in a way that adds value to everyone. Accreditation in South Africa, I don't know if you've noticed the difference between the way RVA audits you and the way SABS audits you. So there is and that's not unique. Nearly every accreditation body will find that variation. And I can tell you, in IAF, there are certain accreditation bodies in the world that are considered much more difficult to get through than others. And that's not something that should be there, because accreditation is everything but that. You should have the same level of confidence whether it's SANS or whether it's RVA. And you shouldn't need RVA accreditation. You should only need one accreditation with respect to it. Part of the problem is, and we go back to Europe, where some of the accredited certification bodies didn't behave quite the way they were supposed to behave, and they got found out. So immediately the confidence is lost at the regulatory level. And at the moment in Europe, there's a huge problem with medical devices certification and the credibility of that. So there is. And then there's a proliferation of accredited bodies out there which are not part of the global system, and people get pulled into the trains. I think that's it. Any questions so far with regards to that? Okay, so I'm going to, do I have time? Yes, I'm going to, yeah. The next ones I'm going to skip through quite quickly. Before I came, I wasn't quite sure if I was giving 4 different presentations or one big presentation. So now I know what I'm doing. I'm going to talk quickly about 17021 Part 1, but I'm going to go through it very, very quickly, and I'm going to just highlight a few things that I think it's important for you as auditors and the SABS to know. So if we can look at 17021. So how many people in the room are auditors? Can you just... All of you? Okay. Are you all competent? Okay, so 17021 is for management systems, and it's the requirements that the SABS must be able to demonstrate that they meet. So it is a series of requirements for the SABS, but in addition to that, we have developed with other technical committees the competence requirements, which I talked to you about. Next slide. And that's the 11 of them. So if you are auditing QMS and you are auditing for business continuity, you need to meet the competence requirements of Part 6 and Part 3. And the SABS need to be able to demonstrate that to SANS with respect to it. It's generic knowledge. So within those documents, it tells you the type of knowledge you need to, and it then leaves it up to the SABS, depending on the kind of audits that you do within those fields, to decide the level and depth of knowledge that you need. So in more complex situations, you're going to need more complex competence than when it's not so complex. So you can see this is becoming an issue for a lot of certification bodies in other developing countries. Before they can actually compete with external people, they have to find auditors in these areas that can actually meet these competence criteria. And that is a huge problem that Frank has identified and that we're trying to work with developing countries. So you can have a very good certification body in Zimbabwe or Kenya, but for them to compete with auditors coming from Europe, it becomes difficult. Okay, so if we look at it, we have a common structure. I'm not going to go through that. So that's every CASPA document has this common structure. But the scope is, again, the next slide. Next slide, sorry. The scope, again, and all the scopes are the same. It's this competence, impartiality, and consistent. And they're critical words. They're words that will always be assessed with respect to it. So if we look at the definitions, why did I put up management system? How many auditors here consult in management consultancy? No one. Which is good. It's critical because you can't. You're not allowed to do it. You cannot certify and consult in management systems. And that is a huge factor. Even if you're a separate entity, there are things around it that you need to take into consideration before you do it, because you have a conflict of interest. So this whole issue has to be built into the system. Next slide, sorry. Technical area I just put there because in terms of the competence, we talk about technical areas and functions. So you're going to have to be competent. So if you're doing EMS in a paper mill, you've got to have the technical competence to be able to ensure you know they've identified the right aspects and impacts and be able to demonstrate that. And then if you're going in somewhere else to do it in a chemical, you need to also be able to have the competence for that technical area. The new standard defines major and minor, and this is important because we allow in this standard for you to certify when there's minor non-conformities, even on a recertification, but you can't on a major, so that's important with respect to it. And what some international organisations do, obviously, with major non-conformances, is they try and they know they're a major, and they try and build them up as areas for improvement. So that's something that the standard is very aware of, and it looks at it in terms, is the CB actually doing the right job in terms of classifying the non-conformities? Next one. And then they also defined audit time, and this is important because that's how they compete internationally. So if the audit time isn't well defined, it's less cost if you're on site. So that's the way they used to compete. So now we've defined it. So everybody has to do at least the minimum same audit time. And if you want to give it cheaper, you can give it cheaper, but not at the expense of the audit time with respect to. So there are new definitions that came from feedback. If we look at the principles, the principle section is clause 4, and it's not requirements. This is guidance to you as auditors. If you come across a situation in the field about impartiality and you can't relate it to a requirement, you can go to the principles, and it gives you guidance in terms of how you can apply. So they're quite important with respect to it. Next slide. Next slide. And this is just 5. It's the legal responsibility, the management of impartiality. Financing, you've got to have insurance to be able to demonstrate that you cover your risk in terms of what you do. Impartiality is crucial. If you cannot, as an auditor, demonstrate you're impartial and you make your audit impartially, you're going to have problems with regards to it. So you have to be able to do that and be able to demonstrate, have you identified conflicts of interest, and how have you either eliminated them or managed them to an acceptable level. And remember, you can always debate with the accreditation body. If they disagree with you, you debate. If you consider it an acceptable level, they need to be able to tell you why it's not, in their opinion. And you've also got to understand that you know your business better. So you will have the information to be able to do that. You're not able to, not only are you not able to do management consultancy, but you cannot do internal audits for any of your clients. So you've got to be wary of that with respect to it. And you cannot outsource audits to a management consultancy. So very often CBs outsource to individual auditors, etc., or organisations, but they can't be management consultants, so they can't be doing that. And then as auditors, you're under an obligation to reveal all your relationships that could impact conflicts of interest. Rather identify them than hide them, because once they're there, it gives the CB the opportunity to see whether they're important. This is just the structural requirements, and we talked a little bit about that, so I'm going to skip that and go to 6. Resource requirements. A lot of the standard is on the competence of people and the people involved in the certification activities. And I'll talk about that in a little bit now. If you outsource, it means you are outsourcing to a different organization or a different individual if that individual is using his own procedures. If you outsource to an individual that's operating under your procedures, that's an external resource, and that's the difference. So it's a crucial difference in terms of that. That allows you to contract with external auditors who operate under your system, and they're just considered an external resource. If we can go to the next one. And this just tells you that you have to have a process in place. So I would come, if I was an auditor, I'd ask for the process, and that process should be the same right across the SABS, except identifying the different criteria. And you've got to monitor your auditors on an ongoing basis, but not just your auditors, other people as well. You've got to have sufficient competent people. You have to authorize your auditors with respect to it. And I think the decision makers, your decision makers also have to be competent. And their competence is exactly the same as an auditor. So you can't decide you're going to have a decision maker that isn't deemed competent. Can we just go to the next slide? Information requirements, process requirements. No, sorry, keep going. We followed a process, and what we decided to do in the standard is the way you approach an audit, we decided to write the standard in exactly the same way. So the requirements are filtered as you would do it. So you've got pre-certification activities, you have got planning audits, initial certification, etc., etc. So that's the process. And it contains the requirements for each of those. If we can just go to the next slide. The audit program is a program that you're obliged to do over the 3-year cycle. So you're also obliged to do what else? You have an audit program and an audit plan. So the audit program is over 3 years, and the audit plan you have to do for each audit. And it has to be more detailed. You've got the 3-year cycle, which I see that you do operate to, but it's at least. However, a scheme can extend that cycle. So a scheme can say, we're not going to do the recertification in 3 years, we're going to do it in 5 years. And that is allowed. So you've got to be very aware of that. I'll give you an example. Sustainable forests. There's no point in them having a 3-year cycle because their times are so long. So they might have a 5 or a 6-year cycle. And I know that RVA has a problem with that because they've gone through the clarification process and they've come to us, we've told them the answer, but they're still not happy with it. However, it's a clarification that has been made. Okay, if we can go to the next slide. And the next slide, you know the 2-stage audit, and you can do the 2 stages together all the time. Yeah? Do you do the 2 stages together? Do you ever do them together? No. Okay, but you're allowed. But you take a risk. You take a risk. And the risk is that the stage 1 doesn't go well, you have to stop and go back and redo. So the way you're doing it is the best way to do it with respect to it. I'm not, if we can skip that because these are required. The decision making is really important here. It's a 4 eyes principle. What is a 4 eyes principle? As an auditor, what do? Do you decide? How many auditors decide they're going to certify this? What do? You make a recommendation, comes back here, and someone completely independent reviews your work. And they review it to make sure, first of all, you did everything according to the plan. Second of all, you got all the evidence that you needed. Thirdly, that evidence is objective and it enables you to make a decision. And then they will be the people who will decide. They will say they can be certified. But that decision maker has to be competent to be not only in the technical area, but in the SABS procedures. So most certification bodies use auditors for the decision making. No, if we can just go back to, so also here, you shall not conduct a review prior to making a decision. So that's the first thing. On the so the major non-conformities have to be cleared, but a plan for the minor. And that's also a distinction, okay, with regards to it. So it does mean that you can go ahead, as long as that plan on clearing the minor non-conformities is stable, or is sufficient. Then the next slide, and I'm going through quickly now because I want to just point out one or two more things here, is before this new standard, when you did a recertification, you had to have the 4 eyes principle for the decision. So in the old version, when you went out and you did a recertification, you came back to the SABS with all the evidence, and someone else had to review the documents to decide to recertify. You don't have to do that anymore. So the team that are doing the recertification can decide to maintain the certification, provided there is when there is no major non-conformance. So if you have a major non-conformance and they picked up a major non-conformance, it has to go back for a review at the SABS. But if not, you as auditors, the lead auditor and the audit team, can make the decision. So that's a significant change, and there was a lot of argument around this in the working group, a huge amount. So a lot of certification bodies internationally and accreditation bodies said, no, you can't do that, you need to have the independent decision, etc., etc. In the end, when we went through the consensus process, this was what was decided. So you can do that with respect to it. So that is a change in terms of it. You don't have to implement it. So you can still, the SABS, I see them looking at me horrified. So you at the SABS can actually make a decision. But remember, if I'm a SANAS auditor and I'm coming in and you're doing that, what's the first thing I'm going to look for? Confidence. So I'm going to want to know that that team was really competent to make that decision. So that's it. Next slide, sorry. I'm not going to talk about surveillance, but the standard tells you what activities you have to include in surveillance. And then this one I just want to point out, in recertification, you have to do it before the certificate expires. If you don't, there is a little bit of leeway, but you could be starting over again. And that's a sure way to lose your client. It gives them a huge opportunity. And I can tell you that there are people out there and they are looking at organisation certificate to see when is the date for renewal, and they're targeting those organisations in terms of it. So you've really got to make that renewal process, and you can do it up to 6 months beforehand. So you've got a lot of scope, and there is some leeway for a little bit of time afterwards, but there's a little bit of penalty. And it has to include an on-site. Okay, so there was a lot of argument about this, because people felt with virtual audits and things like that, why does it all? For the moment, it has to include an on-site, so you can't get away from it. Okay, and then management systems, just very quickly. As a CB, you've got 2 options. You can implement ISO 9001 in your organisation, and then you've met the management system requirements in the standard. Or you can go to option A, which are a series of requirements which are in the standard, and you have to meet that. As a standard, as ISO, as the SABS, I would hope you're meeting ISO 9001. It doesn't mean you have to be certified. You just have to implement the system. ISO has a neutral approach. to certification and conformity assessment. I'm going to tell you something that it's ISO's approach. A lot of people disagree with it. For conformity assessment, ISO believes that if they're done properly, first, second, and third party conformity assessment can be as good as each other. Most people will disagree with me in terms of that. When I say first party, if I am an organisation and I self-declare I meet ISO 9000 and I do that really well with a good intention, I'll get a good result. The problem, of course, is most people, when they self-declare, probably don't have that good intention. Second party is where I go in and I measure whether my customer is meeting the requirements. And that's okay, because that's a contract, so you can, and I'll do a good job myself, satisfy myself. And third party is the only time you can use the word certificate. And that is this independent. And we say they all have a place in terms of conformity assessment. Obviously, third party adds confidence to the whole process, and that's what we want to do, and that's what people want to do. They want to have that confidence. And to be quite honest, experience has shown with self-declaration, people tend to abuse it. Next slide. Next slide. Annex A, you're all familiar with. So that tells you your competence criteria. So it identifies here your knowledge and skills, and it tells you here whatever function you're performing, you've got to do that. And this is in addition to the parts. So this is the prerequisite to the part. Okay, I'm going to go very quick. Do you want me to do 17065?
Yes.
Good. It'll be quicker. Any questions on that? So there are a number of issues that you're going to be grappling with as auditors, and in terms of being able to accommodate what's happening in terms of trends and tooling yourself up. These parts, anyone can meet them. You don't have to be qualified in business continuity. You don't have to be qualified. So it's easy for you to extend your knowledge, to be able to multi-tool up and be more valuable to your organizations. This one I'll go through a little bit quicker, if we can go. The one thing, you operate product certification, and it's a big part of your business. This standard mandates that you cannot operate a product certification process unless you have a fully developed scheme for each. So even if you're just certifying a pencil, you have to have a scheme document that tells me what are all the scheme requirements. So the scheme requirements will be the SABS requirements in terms of, say, how often they go and assess you, the money you pay them, plus the technical requirements that the plan must comply with, and how often you're going to test it, who's going to test it, is it going to be accredited. So you have to have one of those. So if I come to audit you and I look at all the products that you have, I'm going to say, show me the scheme document for the product that you're certifying. I want to see it. I want to see what I need to meet by being certified by you guys. So that's very important, that you understand you have to have a scheme for it. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. So again, you can see the competence. So these are critical. They're coming in all the time. If you're not operating consistently across the SABS, and that's why they're picking up the findings, the accreditation bodies. They're looking for this consistent approach, harmonized approach with respect to definition. Some of these are, again, consultancy. So remember, you need to be very careful as a product certifier in terms of what you can do and what you can't do. And I'll talk a little bit about testing, etc., a little bit later down the line. Certified requirement I talked about. You will be the scheme owner, so you will probably be a scheme owner for hundreds of things. ISO 9000 is the scheme, 9001 is the scheme in itself. So you need to make sure, as a scheme owner, you're maintaining your schemes, you're reviewing them, keeping them up to date with respect to next. General requirements, go ahead. Go ahead, I'm not going to go into that. Sorry, just go back one. Again, the management of the impartiality. And it's really the same as for 17021. You have to clarify management's responsibility in terms of impartiality. Management have to give a commitment. And I think it was quite nice that you heard today that management are quite willing to be held responsible in terms of that. So don't be afraid to come and ask them. Ask them to show you where is this demonstration that they are managing impartiality and they've got a commitment to impartiality. Where is do you have an impartiality committee and things like that? How are they functioning? Are the right people there? Are they doing the right things? Are the people on the committee impartial? Are they the right kind of people with respect to it? Next slide. So this is again the difference between consulting. So if we can go, I want to get to structural requirements. It's really, you have to have a structure that safeguards impartiality. If we can go to the next slide, resources. So this is where you use, first of all, you've got to have competent people again. And for product certification, you can probably use very similar to the management system. But if you're doing product certification, they've got to be knowledgeable on the product. So there. And also, if you're talking about things like interoperability and things like that, they've got to be knowledgeable and up to date with regards to that. So you've got to be able to demonstrate for each scheme that your auditors are competent. So you're going to be monitored, you're going to be looked at, etc. But you don't need to overburden the system. You've got to be really careful not to overburden the system and go to too much detail. It's up to the CB to decide. It's not up to anyone else. So if you're going in and you're looking at products like a bottle, you need very little in terms of that. So don't over-prescribe. And I have a funny feeling in your procedures, you over-prescribe. You don't need to over-prescribe. It's very like ISO 9001. If I ask 10 people, and if you don't have a procedure and it doesn't say documented, and I ask 10 people here, how do you do it? They all answer me the same. You don't need the procedure. You don't need it. But if I ask 10 people and one tells me something different, then you do. So where it says documented, you've got to document. Where it doesn't, you've got to decide what you do, and do you operate consistently? So internal and external resources. So if we look, this is important because as part of product certification, you as the SABS have the choice to use internal or external test houses. Or you could actually use internal or external auditors, etc. If you're using internal resources, so you've got the certification body is doing product certification of the pencil. The pencil is going to a laboratory in the SABS to be tested. Does that laboratory need to be accredited? How many people say yes? How many people say no? Nobody can see you. It doesn't. The standard does not mandate accreditation. What does it do? It says, as the certification body doing the product certification, you've got to make sure that the laboratory you send it meet the relevant requirements of 17025. So you have a responsibility as the certification body to tell me, as an AB auditor, how you did that. How did you decide, when you sent it to the SABS laboratory, that they were competent to do that test and they met? And what's the easiest way? It's accreditation. That's the easiest way. So an auditor from SANET should accept that without any further question. But if you get an auditor and an assessor, I shouldn't call them an auditor, an assessor coming in, and you have decided You're going to decide they're competent. It's a lot more paperwork that you've got to demonstrate. Who went into the lab? How did you overcome this conflict of interest, etc., etc. So that's an important aspect with regards to it. And it's the same for inspection. You don't have to, and in actual fact, so you don't have to decide that the laboratory is accredited. You can use an unaccredited. And as long as you do it right, that's fine. No one can say you're not meeting the requirement. And sometimes you outsource to a client. So the standard addresses that. So you do a product certification and the testing is unique testing. So you tell the client that they can do it. So the standard addresses that, and it says if you were going to accept their results, there's certain processes that you have to go through to satisfy yourself that it's okay. And if you don't do that, you can't accept their results. No matter what happens, the CB is always responsible for the outsourced activities. So they are. If we go to the next one, process, I'm going to go quickly through that. I'm nearly finished, so you needn't worry. If we go through that, next slide, this is the 4 eyes principle again. So you've got to be very careful. In every single standard except one, and I'm going to ask you as auditors which one, in every single standard you have the 4 eyes principle for the review and the decision. Someone independent has to make the decision. The only standard we don't have that is inspection. The inspector makes the decision. So it's the only one. There is another standard coming up where it might happen with regards to it. And then the decision. So the decision, this one is slightly different. So for the decision of a product, I could ask an external auditor to take the decision. Okay? As long as that auditor or that person is operating under my organizational control. Okay, so it's a little bit more flexible in terms of that. So you've got to be able, so it's slightly different. Someone else has to take the decision, but they don't have to be a permanent full-time employee of the SABS. If the SABS has a contract with that person and they're in their organizational control, they can actually take the decision. Next. When you use a mark, this is also quite important, you have to have ongoing surveillance. Okay, so you can't issue a mark. There are exceptions where you can, but generally when you issue a mark, it's an indication that they're continually meeting their requirements. Okay, termination. This is just the routine stuff with regards to it. Next slide. Management systems is exactly the same. Next slide, that's it. So that's it. I have something on the fourth industrial revolution. I don't know if there's time, I can do it later, or I can just give it to you and you can distribute it. I'll distribute it. Frank can give it. And he can give it any time. You gave it at IF and ILAC. Go ahead. It's not very, it's very generic. It's very, very generic. So lots of people have different definitions of the fourth revolution, industrial revolution. And exactly what does it mean and how will it impact standards and certification and the way that we operate in the future. In Europe, they are experimenting. So in Europe, a lot of countries think in the next 10 years, people like you and me will not have full-time jobs. A lot of the work will be done by artificial intelligence. So what they think is people will only be employed maybe for 2 hours a day at the most. And how do people continue to live if that's the situation. So a lot of countries have, and Switzerland had a vote on it. So Switzerland voted last year, you're going to be astounded by this. They voted, should everyone living in Switzerland get a salary from the government of 4,000 Swiss francs a month, irrespective of how much they earn. That was put to the vote. In Switzerland, they've got a devolved system. So the system is the people vote on everything. They vote every weekend. So you literally go and vote every weekend. And it gives rise, so we have different holidays in different parts of the country because some people voted against the holidays. And we voted on increasing, they wanted to increase the minimum work period from 4 weeks to 6 weeks. They voted against that everywhere. So that they are sensible in terms of the way that they vote. But the one on the 4,000 a year was rejected. But then municipalities decided to experiment. And they decided that instead of giving them 4,000, they'd give them 2,000 a month. And the reason for this is they want to see what would it be like if they had a situation in future when the fourth revolution is here, people aren't working, they're going to have to pay people. And what it would work, and what would people do with their spare time. So there's whole loads of issues around this that are coming forward with respect to us. So anyway, we've got different opinions about what the fourth revolution is about, but we had a few before that. We had steam before that. Next one, sorry. In the 18th century, then in the 19th century, we had mass production, we had the light bulb coming in, etc. And then we had the digital revolution in the 1980s, which was looking at technology and the role of technology in moving us forward. And now, on the fourth one, this technology is becoming embedded, not only in everything we do, but in us. We're being embedded with technology all the time, and all the devices that we use. And they all have to literally communicate with each other. So one of the challenges is, if I've got one piece of equipment, can I communicate with everything in terms of that? My TV, my house, my car, my colleagues, everything. Can I see where the traffic is? It's literally everything, every single platform you've got. But it's also got to be secure, in terms of accessing your data. With respect, no, just go back, sorry. Sorry, I was too quick with that. So one of the things that ISO are looking at with respect to it, so it's 3D printing. Everything's going to be 3D printing soon. It's cheap, it's throwaway, that's what we're doing. We've got to be careful with plastic, we're polluting the seas. How can we overcome that? Intelligent transport systems. And you can see the problems that they have with that. But there's a lot of cities in Europe that are literally operating that now at the moment. And it's operating quite effectively. But how far we'll get in the next 10 years, cybersecurity is huge. In Europe, personal data is a big issue. A company can be fined millions and millions and millions. 25% of their turnover if they give away your data or they're not diligent in protecting it with respect to it. And now we have smart cities. So where you go into the city and everything from the transport, the sewerage, the water distribution, the lighting, the electricity is all controlled and smart citied around. So how does conformity assessment and accreditation deal with this? How are they going to adapt and be responsive to it? And they have to be able to respond to it in a way that next slide, sorry, that facilitates international trade. How much are we going to be using virtual auditing? Will you just be sitting at home for your 2 hours in the morning monitoring different organizations in terms of it and collecting data so that the data is coming through to you as an auditor, and that data is going through a secure system so you know the data is okay, and is your role really just to monitor that and make sure it's okay? And when does that become more than auditing? When does that become kind of big brother in respect to it. So we've got to be able to adapt and change so that we can actually make sure that trade happens. Access to markets is critical. It needs to be able to keep customers satisfied and help regulators. Regulators need to be able to use what's happening in the fourth revolution to give them confidence that the water is okay, that the air is okay. What happens if the air isn't okay? How does that work? How does the smart city tell you as citizens this is going to happen? How does it get to your cell phone? So all of that needs to be included. Business continuity is a huge standard in most European countries because it's flooding, it's earthquake, it's fire. A university in London, the research department broke down. They didn't have business continuity. So they thought, oh great, we're insured, we build the building again. What they didn't realise was that 80% of the funding for the university came from the research. It took them years to get that back up and working. Whereas if they had this business continuity implemented, that would have been identified with respect to it. SMEs, because that's the way we're working in future, it's going to be thousands and thousands of SMEs. You're going to have to be able to offer them a service that's quick, easy, and not costly. So you've got to use the fourth generation in your systems to make that easy for them, not a hindrance. And that gives them tremendous power. It levels the playing field. I can compete with Siemens if I'm certified by the SABS. I can go to the customer and say, my product is just as good as Siemens. I've been certified, and they have that confidence in that. Credibility, trust, benefit from global best practice, which it will allow. It's going to be a global scenario in terms of it. And that's it. Thank you all very much. I hope I didn't bore you.
Thank you very much, Sean. That was really, really interesting. I don't want to lose this opportunity, and I'm sure you don't want to as well. So I think it might be appropriate to allow, we'll give it 10 minutes. If there are questions, if there's anything that you want clarity on, Sean is here, he's available. So the roving mics, many of you got them.
I'll be here at lunchtime as well.
Okay. Sean will also be here during lunch. But just to kick it off, if there are questions that you want to raise, please, this is your opportunity. Any show of hands so we can get Lenny coming across? Okay, so we've got one question. Any other show of hands? No, okay, we'll take it. Okay, we'll take both.
I just need some clarity when you spoke about the certificates for clients can be renewed within 6 months. So if your scheme requirement says the certificate is valid for 3 years, and I've done the audits within 6 months, and in 2 months they are ready for the next cycle. So I have 4.5 years now, 3 years and 4 months. So can I issue the certificates valid for 3 years and 4 months? Is that allowed? Or do I need to wait for the 4 months to lapse and then I issue them based on the effective dates? Or do I then change the effective dates, which then reduces the cycle? What's the correct way of doing it?
So, if I ask you, what is the effective date always on the certificate? How do you determine that? Which date? It's the decision-making date, so you can't change that. Your effective date is always the decision-making date. So there's one scenario. So you go in and you assess them. Say you assess them 4 months early. So you assess them 4 months early. Say 3 months early. It's 3 months. So you assess them 3 months early, and you finish that assessment within a week or 2 weeks or whatever it is. You can issue the certificate from the effective date of that decision, or you can also make it valid from when the last one is up. Okay? The playing on the 6 months, you have to be careful because there are other requirements in terms of when you can do that. So when you extend it, the only time you can extend, we're talking now management system, right? The only time you can extend the the cycle on a certificate, so you can't change the cycle. It's a 3-year cycle unless the scheme indicates it. Okay? So you can't decide that for ISO 9001, even though you have your own scheme requirements here, you can't decide to extend that. It has to be a scheme with a justification using a longer cycle. So the kind of justifications you're talking about are things where the cycle within the scheme, within the product, is much longer. So you've got to be very careful there. And you've got to be very careful of creep in terms of your cycle. You've always got to go.
Maybe if I assist a little bit. If I can just take it by way of an example, Tommy, and I'm sure that's what your question is. If a client certificate expires now coming in June, and the work has been done, let's say it's commenced now, the work is complete, and a decision has now been taken, let's use the example by March. You've now taken a decision that you're now going to renew that certificate for a further 3 years. So you're not changing the cycle, you want to leave this certificate for a further 3 years. The question Tommy is raising is, that certificate officially only expires in June. And his question is, the cycle for that company is actually June 2019 to June 2022. So even though we've taken the decision now in March, his question is that cycle still up to June 2022?
It is.
Okay.
So on an initial it's different. So that's on an initial it's different. So on a recertification, your cycle, so even though you do it before, your cycle will still be the June to whatever, June the following year. So when you're doing a recertification or a surveillance or whatever, you can do it beforehand, you can finish, so you can finish up to I think 3 months, I can't remember if it's 3 months or 6 months now, I think it's 6 months or 3, I can't remember. But your cycle stays the same. So even though your previous certificate, when that's up, the certificate is effective for the next 12 months of the one you've done.
Well, I think that clarifies that, Tommy. I'm sure that satisfies that. Confirms that.
Good day, colleagues. When you were presenting a slide, I think it was on 1701, there was bullet point 9 on recertification. And then I saw it was highlighted in bold to say recertification includes on-site clearance. I don't know whether you're talking about where there are major non-conformities that they should be cleared on-site, or you are talking whenever there are major non-conformities, before you recertify, there must be an on-site clearance. Can you just give a clarity on that one?
On-site what? So when you're doing a recertification, you have to include as part of that an on-site visit. An on-site visit.
It's not about non-conformities.
No, because look, on a recertification, it's quite clear. If you've got a major non-conformity, you've got to clear that. So you've got to give them sufficient time to clear that. If you've only got minor non-conformities, it's fine. You can go ahead. As long as they give you a plan. No, it's all right. So for a recertification, a major you've got to clear. So that it doesn't. You've got to make sure that doesn't exist when you go for the decision. If they've got minor non-conformities, They can send you a pen, fax it, email it. If when it comes to you and you're happy that it addresses it, you can accept that and go ahead with the process. Okay. That's fine.
So let me just clarify. What Sean is doing is sharing the rules from a 17021 perspective. On this particular one, our procedure says whether it's major or minor, we need to have it clear. So there's room for us to consider whether we align to 17021 and whether there's merits for it. But right now, I think all Sean's doing is sharing what the 17021 standard calls for. Okay, Lenny, you got another question?
Aside to that, I was just saying that I think what I understood the gentleman saying was that in this day and age, surveillance audits are done off-site with electronic agent, but a reset must be done on-site. And I thought that was highlighted. Is it not so?
You got to be careful here. So remember, it identifies a whole series of things that you need to cover in your surveillance visit. The certification body, you can do it off-site if it's a reliable off-site virtual audit and everything is working and you have access to the records. So an off-site doesn't mean that they run away and bring things. It should be able to give you access to the records and things like that, so you've got to be very careful. The other important thing is risk. The minute you calculate there is a risk factor involved in an offsite, you've got to be able to mitigate that risk, and so you do. And I can tell you, like at the international level, I would say 99, maybe 98% of certifications bodies do surveillance audits on site. I think looking to the future is a different thing, when there is more reliability and more experience built into virtual audits and that kind of thing.
I think we're going to take this as the last question. Sean is going to, and then before Warren, Tabisa, and then we'll take the last question from Lawton. Sean is going to be here during lunch, so if there's other questions, we'll handle them separately. Tabisa?
Hi, Sean. Hi. You spoke about the 4I principle, and you mentioned that inspection, 17020, does not fall under that. I just needed to understand, was there a specific reason when the standard was developed that it shouldn't, fall under that?
Okay. So I just want to come back to one thing that was mentioned there. As a certification body, so the requirements in 17021 and 17065 are basic requirements. So the CB is perfectly entitled to add their own requirements in terms of how they operate, to give themselves confidence as an organisation in terms of it. The only thing they're not allowed to do is pick and choose. They have to meet 17021 and 170, but they can add more, like the ones you were talking about. And most CBs do that, the vast majority. Coming back to you, so if you are, the crucial difference in inspection is an inspector goes out and he inspects. So the crucial difference between management system and product is the professional judgment of the inspector. He goes out and he looks at an elevator. He has to decide then and there. He can't go to someone else. He can't bring it back. He has to decide then and there, is the elevator meeting the requirement? Is the fire extinguisher operating, etc. So that's why there's no need for it doesn't stop a certification body looking at what he brings back and making sure he's got all the evidence, but the actual decision is taken by the inspector. And that's why he's got to be competent in that area. Does that clear it up a bit? Yeah.
Sean, we've got the last question. Laura?
I'd just like to revisit the question that Tommy made earlier on. This is about the recertification audit happening for 6 months prior to the expiry date. Now, if you recollect, 2018 was a unique year in the sense that we had transition ISO 9001 and ISO 14001. And there was a major project to get all our certificates through, because the expiry date was for both of them was the 15th of September. So then you had this issue that the project required that we do everything in terms of the auditing cycle so that we can get the packs through. However, some of our companies, for instance, with the expiry date of the certificate, say for instance, be December 2018. But the recertification audit was done 6 months prior to that so that we could get everything through, because we had this bottleneck that we had to manage. And now these certificates were issued valid for 1 month. So we're sitting with a conundrum that we have to do recertification upon recertification. Is there any way around that other than actually getting additional resources now to manage this process?
Okay, so I'm not going to get into that one too much. What I can tell you is that the transition period, 3 years, there was a process developed by IAF highlighting milestones in terms of that and what to do and what was available in certain scenarios and with respect to it. And I think that's all I'm going to say on that one. I could get myself into trouble if I say more. Thanks for that, Sean. Amanda?
I think we need to give Sean a hand.